day, I'm Dr. Burger. I'm the lecturer for teaching language structures and conventions in English as the first additional language in the intermediate phase. This presentation is going to be about the various strategies, approaches, and models that we use for teaching language structures and conventions. So, while we do not always deal with these three strategies or aspects of teaching language separately, I just want to explain them to you separately. So we have strategies, which are things that we do in class to help children learn language. So it can be games, stories, poems, songs, repetition of information. You can design or get worksheets or do different activities. So those are strategies. Then when we move to approaches, that is the underlying method that you use when you apply your strategy. So, for example, if you have a worksheet, you may use the worksheet to teach to use the inductive or deductive approach to teaching. You can use a game to implement your direct or indirect way of teaching, similarly with the functional and notional approach and the situation and context approach to teaching grammar. And then the third one, the models. That is how you structure your lesson. So that can be, there are various models in the study guide, a model for teaching grammar effectively, the presentation practices production model, or the notice structuring and proceduralizing. So as I said, the teaching activities or strategies, and I use activity and strategy interchangeably, could be vocabulary games. So that's a game that you play with the children where you teach them vocabulary. Also in the study guide, there are various games where they can act out words. You can help them find words, but those are games that you play. Grammar games could be an example of where you write the words of a sentence separately on pieces of paper and you give it to the children and they must stand in a line each holding a word so that the word makes sense, the sentence makes sense. That could be a grammar game. Stories, songs, and poetry that can help with aspects of pronunciation, even with punctuation, and spelling strategies such as repetition of words. And there we have explicit, implicit teaching. So already you can see that there's an approach that comes in with that. And then also modeling. Modeling is where you demonstrate to children how to do something. You show them. And so those are just some of the strategies. When we then look at approaches, there are two approaches that are mentioned in the CAPS document that the Education Department feel are good approaches to use, and that's text-based. Text-based is where you use a passage from the DBE book or a nice passage that you found, a story that's appropriate to the grade of the learners and their language proficiency, and then you use that text to teach certain things. You can use it to teach a tense, to see whether they are comfortable with new vocabulary that you've taught. So you use the text as the vehicle for teaching. And then there is the communicative approach, which where often in the first additional language lessons, we use the communicative approach to practice speaking and listening. There's also then the inductive or deductive approaches that we often use with grammar, where either you start with a passage where you show them direct or indirect speech and they have to find the rule, or you teach them the rule. They have to then apply the rule. As we've seen earlier, the direct or indirect approaches, the functional notional approach, which is also in the study guide, and the grammar and situation context. Then we move on to models. So as I said, we use models to structure our lessons. Then there are three that we discuss in the study guide: a model for teaching grammar effectively, presentation, practice, production, and the noticing, structuring, and proceduralizing. And what these models do when you apply them, it helps you how to introduce your lesson, what do you do first, and how do you teach your grammar, and how do you check for understanding? What is it what you do, what the children do? And that is what we use the models for. Then when we look at the application of our strategies, approaches, and models, you will then see that although they are discussed separately here and also in the study guide, we use them, we synthesize the strategies, approaches, and models when we design a lesson and when we deliver a lesson. So if we look at the use of the past tense verb in sentences, the strategy or an activity could be that you revise verbs with the learners. Again, you want them to understand that we are working with a doing word, and also then what does it look like in the past tense, and you would then combine it with present tense and maybe future tense as well. Then you can use a game, as I've mentioned before, where learners construct sentences by moving words on paper around. You can either let them organize the paper on their desks, or you can let them stand holding the papers, as you can see there. And then when they stand in line with the papers, the other children can then see whether the verb is in the right place and the verb is in the right tense. And then, for example, if we use the text-based approach and the deductive approach, you will then remind the learners how the past tense is formed. So you'll show them the rule, and then they will read and apply it in a text. So when we then present it, as you will have to do in some of the assessments, you will present it as I've done there. You will show me what do you do in the presentation part of the model that you are using to implement your lesson, and you will see that there you are going to have an activity and a strategy and an approach. Similarly, with the practice, you're going to have an activity and an approach, and then with production as well. So I hope you will enjoy learning about these strategies, approaches, and models. And I also encourage you to observe how you are applying it in your current practice. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me or use the chat function on the module site. Thank you.